Hello.
All right, great. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Building Champions Edge call. I am really looking forward to today's call. This is Daniel Harkavy, and I am excited to talk to you about leadership today. And we've got a special guest. We've got my friend Dr. Henry Cloud with us, and I think you guys are going to definitely enjoy learning from Henry as we move forward. So let me kind of set the stage for our time ahead. I'll do that quickly so we can jump into today's content. About 2 months ago, Henry and I spent a day together, and he was sharing with me some insights and learnings that he was working on. He's working on a project right now, which is a new book that I think every one of us are going to want to read. It's Boundaries for Leaders, and I think that was the working title. Henry, you can tell me in the moments ahead whether or not that title is going to stick. But as we spent this day together, much of our conversation was really talking about leadership and how leaders, the best leaders, think differently than most. And what you guys may not know about Dr. Henry Cloud is that he's got a really unique background. He spent the majority of his younger years as a clinician. So he completely understands how the mind works. He understands how thinking patterns impact our ability to lead. So he's got the clinical background, as well as he's been a very successful entrepreneur and business leader, and today serves as a thought leader in leadership as an executive coach. And he is coaching some of this nation's best leaders, and has just a really neat space that he works in. He calls it the middle space between being the clinician and the leadership track expert. So with that experience that he has, and with the years that he spent in both sides, both in business leadership and on the clinician side, he brings a perspective that I think every one of us will have the ability to learn from. So Henry, welcome to the November Champions Edge call. It's great to have you.
Good to be here, Daniel. It's going to be fun.
It is. So the book's still going to be called Boundaries for Leaders?
It is called Boundaries for Leaders. And, you know, on the surface, it sounds a little defensive, right? They got to stand up there and set their boundaries. But really, it's about the way that leaders lead in being, the phrase the book starts out with is, you know, you're ridiculously in charge. And all a boundary is a property line. And so when you look at, like, your yard, you know, you got a property line around it, and you are in total ownership and control of what happens on that property. So it's about the culture, it's about the way you lead, it's about the way that you build teams. It's all of those structures that leaders have to do to make things work.
Great, great. Well, we've got hundreds of leaders on the line with us today. And what I want to do is I want to jump into a few key areas of your learning and the book. And I want to talk specifically in the first part of our call about leaders and thinking.
Yeah. So
when you look at successful leaders, tell us a little bit about how successful leaders think differently than maybe leaders that haven't quite reached their peak levels of success.
Well, you know, it's really interesting, Daniel. A lot of times when we talk about thinking, we get to where, you know, sort of the content of thinking, which I'll get to in a minute, sort of like, you know, is somebody positive, are they negative, are they optimistic, are they pessimistic, are they creative, all that kind of stuff. But where I want to focus in the beginning, because this is where I see businesses do huge turnarounds and get unstuck when leaders begin to get this, and that is, are they able to think? Before we start talking about what you're thinking, what we've got to do is make sure that your brain is able to think, A, and that, B, you are leading your teams, employees, direct reports, company, everybody. You're leading them in a way that they can think. So, guys, if you've got a pencil there, if you don't take anything else away from today, I want you to write down these three things. Basically, I'm going to give you a little brain anatomy here. Basically, for us to get from A to Z, to accomplish any kind of goal, the brain has to do three things. It's got to, number one, attend to what is relevant. Okay? Now, by that, I mean this. If you're going to drive your car from here to 7-Eleven, then your brain is zeroing in order to be able to effectively do that. It's zeroing in on the oncoming traffic, your speed, the turn that's coming up, which lane you're in, how fast you're going, is the rain on, do you need to turn the windshield white? You know, there's stuff that matters that your brain has to attend to in order to execute the next action that's going to make the goal happen, A. The second thing your brain's got to do is it's got to inhibit everything that keeps it from doing the right thing. So it's got to shut out everything that's not relevant to that or anything that's toxic to that. So if, you know, you can't text while you drive, the brain cannot do that, for example. You can't be reading a book. You can't start watching a video. You can't get too distracted with kind of looking around and seeing the sights. You miss a turn, for example. Or toxic. You can't have somebody yelling at you in the seat next to you because that changes the brain as well. So it's got to attend and it's got to inhibit. And the third thing is you've got to have a working memory. So I can't just, in a time machine, drop you in a car halfway between here and 7-Eleven. You'd be paralyzed. You wouldn't know whether to hit the brakes or the accelerator or turn because you wouldn't know what you had just done previously. So we've got to have a working memory where things are current in the flow of the brain to be able to keep moving it down the path. Now you take this to business, and you can see why sometimes, especially entrepreneurs who create things, and they like start stuff, and they're kind of all over the place, and they're creative, and they got this idea and the next idea. What they do is they create literally ADD organizations, and they don't sometimes provide the ways and the practical ways that keep the company and keep individuals attending, inhibiting, and staying with a working memory where they can accomplish stuff. So the first thing we have to look at is that kind of thinking. Is the brain working?
Okay, so when you're working with leaders and you're trying to assess whether their brain is working in those ways,
yeah.
Tell us a little bit, you know, just assume right now that you're on the line with an executive. What's some practical advice or coaching that you would give to them to specifically improve their thinking?
Well, the first thing I want to do is I would just want to, you know, I'm assessing inside of myself as I listen to them. Do they know specifically where they're going and what's relevant to getting there? And I want to see in their activities and their emphases and the structures they're providing, are they moving their teams and their companies in that direction? Let me give you an example of this. You know, it sounds kind of theoretical, but I'll give you a practical example of this. One company I worked with for a long time, they had one particular outlet, and you know, just retail outlet, that among gazillions of them, this was a, you know, tens of billions of dollar company, but they had this one location that consistently just killed everybody else. They were always the leader in the country. That one location did about 80 or 90 million a year. And so in building some models for them, some coaching models, I went out to study this one location. And when I met the guy that led it, I knew instantly I wasn't talking to Einstein. I was talking to a high school football coach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was his personality. So I said, tell me about kind of some of the stuff you do. And the first thing he said was, well, every day starts with the morning sales meeting. I said, well, what is that? He says, 15 minutes. Do it every day. I said, what do you do? He said, first thing I do is I get up there and I tell them two or three or four, maybe four things maximum, new information about the marketplace, about customers, or about this or something that's really, really usable and relevant to them that day. Second thing I do is I want 3 or 4 people to stand up and in a sentence or two tell us about one big victory they had yesterday. Third thing is I take one of them, I bring him up, and I interview him. So where'd you get the lead? How'd you find the customer? What were their objections? How long did the sales take? Did you have to bring, you know, support in from the office? Did you need to call a partner in? Did you need to do a display? How many times did they say? And get the whole story from them in a narrative. And then he said, right after that, I'll ask somebody who's got a big challenge with some deal they're working on today. Somebody will raise their hand, they'll say it, and the group will speak into it. And he said, and then, I send them out. He said, you know what? Nobody ever misses that meeting.
Mm.
I said, well, let me tell you why. Because what he was doing, and he did that every morning, what he was doing was, he was, without even saying it, he was keeping what was relevant to making deals happen always in their heads, in front of them all the time. And he was shutting everything else out, no reporting in that meeting, no, whining, no complaining, just relevant stuff, shutting everything else out. He did it every day, and it kept closing deals in a working memory in their heads. That's a simple example of how leaders unconsciously, the guy's never heard of these brain functions before, but he did it without knowing it.
I love that, and it's such a that's a great story, and I'm glad that you shared that. I think that in itself is so relevant for our listeners. I'm just sitting here, and I think when you and I were talking about this last, we spent a few hours on the topic, and today we've got 30 minutes, so I'm going to move us forward. But I want everyone to hear something that you said, and that I think as we're coming into year end is a real relevant action plan for all of you on the call. The key to effective leadership and these leaders really flourishing is that they have a discipline of thinking. And Henry's talking about, do they think do they think in healthy ways, and does that promote healthy thinking within the organization? And what we've seen as executive coaches is many leaders just don't allow themselves to have thinking time. And I can tell you firsthand, when that starts to go away, my leadership starts to suffer. So we have to have a discipline around thinking time. So here's the action plan that I would give to each and every one of you. And those of you who have been clients for a long, long time, for years, you know that year end, one thing that we do here at Building Champions is we'll take a Sabbath day. We'll take a day to just reflect, to assess, to adjust, to plan. And I want to encourage all of you on the line, before January hits, give yourself the gift of one full day to think, to reflect, to look at your life plan, to look at your business vision, to look at your business plan, and to adjust where you need to.
And Daniel?
Yeah, go.
If I can hop into that thought there, and if you just take the 3 points that I gave you and overlay it on part of that day, and you look back over the year and you look at your current activities and where you want to go, and you start asking, okay, what that's really relevant have I used my time and energy to really attend to, and what have I failed to inhibit? And do I attend to it like, for a couple of days, and then I get sidetracked, and it's 3 or 4 weeks later before we get back to that initiative, and by then your working memory is gone.
Yeah.
So just use that 3-point kind of assessment tool to look at your year, and if you're on track with the stuff Daniel's talking about.
That's great. That's great. The second gem you gave them was the example of that football coach. Each and every one of you, what is it that you need to be hyper-focused on and repeating to your team day in and day out? What do they need to hear day in and day out?
And interesting thing was his football coach was selling insurance.
Yeah, no doubt, which is fun. I get to be with about 60 or 70 of those folks on Friday, and I'm so looking forward to it. So you're actually helping me with my Friday
cool.
talk as well. So thank you. Let's jump to the second. Part of today's call. I know you want to keep going on thinking, but let's talk about leaders.
Well, the last thing I was going to say about thinking, I talked about the process of thinking, but there's also content.
Yeah.
And real quickly, what we see people, beginning, what happens in an environment where there's a lot of stuff that's outside of your control, the market's bad, federal regulations, all sorts of stuff happens that affects you that you can't control, then the thinking starts to shift, and it starts to shift into this mode that psychologists have called learned helplessness, where the brain learns, well, I don't have any control over all this stuff, so nothing I do really matters, and it begins to stop doing the things as aggressively as you always have done that do matter. And here's what happens. It shifts into a software that I call the 3 Ps. And so here's what the 3 Ps are. It's when your brain interprets an event in ways that hurt your business. Like an event would be you call you go try to do a deal, the guy says no, or you do a cold call, or you do a presentation, some event, and it doesn't turn out well. They turn down the deal. It's not right for them or whatever. When your brain's working normally, it explains that as an isolated event. Oh, well, I guess it wasn't right for them, or, the market's not, or the timings, or they're not big enough, or they don't have the money, or something. And you move on and do the next one. Well, when you got the 3 Ps working, it interprets that same event this way. Number one, first P, it personalizes it. The guy says no, you drive away thinking, I'm not very good at this. I suck at this. I can't really say. Why did I think I could lead? What made me think I could reach these goals? And you start to personalize it in that it's something about you that's deficient. The second P is it goes pervasive. Well, it's not just that customer. It's like all my customers. In fact, it's this industry. Our products suck. My life sucks. Everything is bad. And it gets this subjective kind of bleh. And then thirdly, the time element kicks in on the third P, and it says it's permanent. In other words, it won't be different tomorrow. It'll always be this way. Once that happens, it's like everything is stuck in the mud.
That is so good for all of us to hear. And I'm sure there are plenty on the call right now that are listening going, I wonder if that's happening to me. I wonder if I am if I've lost context and perspective for how life is. If we start believing that we are only surrounded by challenges and there are no longer opportunities, we're writing our future. I mean, we're writing it.
And you're in the same scenario, Daniel. It's literally, I hate to say this, but it's all in people's heads. I'll give you one example. In the financial meltdown, in 08 and 09, I was doing a lot of work on Wall Street and working with a lot of the top performers in the financial services industry, like Barron's top 50 kind of guys. And I had them say stuff like, I've been a leader in this industry for all these years. I go to the office, I just sit and stare at my computer, and it kind of like wake up, an hour later and say, what have I done? I can't make a phone call. And they were really, really affected by all this. And so I was talking to this one guy one time in one day and all that, and he said, well, he said, all my clients like hate me. I didn't cause this meltdown, but they're like, blame us. He said, it's just terrible. And I said, wait a minute, how many clients do you have? And he says, like 300. I said, all right, how many brokers do you think there are in the U.S.? And how many gazillions there are. I said, okay, if all your clients hate you, then all of their clients hate them too, right? So what does that mean? Everybody's looking for a new broker because they hate theirs. So you might have 300. Let's say they all walk out. You've got millions out there that are looking for somebody new. This is the greatest opportunity you've ever had. And so you start thinking, you're right. So we developed a plan where every time he met somebody, just in conversation at a party or, how these guys work, just ask them this question. So are you happy with the financial advice you've gotten in all this turmoil? And everybody's going to say no, right? And he said, well, do you want a second opinion? And he had the best year he'd ever had.
Yeah, that's great.
One shift in thinking.
Yeah, a huge shift in thinking. That's, that changes somebody's trajectory. I love it. I want to talk to our listeners about leadership, setting boundaries so that you have quality of life outside of work and how that impacts our leadership in the office. Can you spend a couple minutes talking about that?
Yeah, it's something, Daniel, that as the years go on, this is what I love about what Building Champions does. It's something that can only be done intentionally and proactively, because just the way it happens, you get into the mix and the urgent crises, the pull, the greasy wheels, the squeaky wheels that get all the grease, the 20% of the people that cause 80% of your angst, all of that stuff. There's never time for doing the stuff that is vital to life. Here's a rule in life. Vital things are rarely urgent. High blood pressure, for example, heart disease, those will kill you, they'll never hardly take you to an emergency room day by day. You can be dying because you're neglecting them, and then you can one day, boom. The urgent stuff, you know, you have a hangnail, ow, that hurts, and you'll go do something about that right now. So what you've got to do is you've got to figure out how much time away, like that Sabbathing that Daniel talked about, how much time away do I need? That goes in the schedule first. Date night, working on your marriage if you're married, or your relationships, your kids, your spiritual development, all of those things. If you do not have some boundaries that are structures, and what I then it's not going to happen. What I recommend is, in one of my books, I've got this chapter called Find the Misery and Make a Rule. And so, for example, if you're seeing a pattern develop of you always miss dinner because this call comes in that something happens at 10 till 5, for example, then if that's where all your misery is coming from, you make a rule where you don't answer the phone after 4:30, or you don't do email at home, or there's no right and wrong. What you've got to do is you've got to find the leaks, and sometimes the leaks are a certain person that's stealing all of your life, and you got to find the misery, and then you got to make a rule. And once you begin to do that and you get proactive about it, then and only then will you begin to find that balance, because there will never be enough time to get it all done.
And thinking there's a few hundred people shaking their heads saying, absolutely. And, we need to make some rules.
And you know what's sad about that, Daniel, is that, in all the research on like how we actually behave and how we actually accomplish something, one of the, you'll hear people say all the time, well, I guess you didn't want it bad enough, or you would have done it. And there's nothing farther from the truth. In fact, one of the most depressing motivators that we can have is desire. I mean, there are so many people that want to grow their business, or they want to lose 50 pounds, or they want to change a relationship or something like that. Desire is pretty much one of the worst things to depend on in reaching any goal that we can have, because it also leads to depression if we don't accomplish it, right? Because the obstacles in the way, we don't meet our desires. Instead of desire, the only way to make anything happen is do not depend on your desire, because other things will get in the way. You must depend on priorities. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, people that are in shape, they don't want to get out of bed at 6 in the morning to go work out, but there's what I call a no-choice choice. They've already made the choice that they're not even going to make a choice every day. It's like paying your mortgage. Who wants to pay their mortgage? I don't have a desire to send in a check every month. But you do it as a no-choice choice, and you got to figure out what those no-choice choices are. Every Thursday night we go on date night. Even if we hate each other, we go on date night. These kinds of things that you've got to do that are priorities to create the life balance, not because you feel like you have time or want to.
Well, that is great. I mean, what you're doing is you're, again, just affirming so much of the power behind life planning and so much of the power behind business planning. And I love how, we're getting to have this call here at year end, a month left in the year. It's a great time for leaders to do the reflect and the assess and the plan and put it together. You've spoken so many times on our brain, and it just has a desire to grow and to learn. Let's talk, and maybe.
And it also has a desire to reach goals. In the thriving research that's been done, especially in the last decade, one of the things we know about people that have a sense of well-being is they're goal-oriented people. And that doesn't mean you have to be anal about it, but they actually have goals. Like when they wake up in the morning, they kind of know what would a good day look like by the end of the day. Even if it's I'm going to do nothing today, they have some sort of a goal. And the goal is I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just be in the flow, and whatever happens today, that's fine. But at least they knew where they were going. Mm-hmm. And so that's why some of the goal-setting stuff is so important.
Well, I just love the clinical or support for that. We know as a coaching company that those that do the best in business and in life, they've got clarity around what they'd like to see in the different areas of their business, the different areas for their life at some point in the future. And what they see pulls them forward, and it helps them to make those no-choice choices. And that's where most people get hemmed up. And you know this as well, is there are all sorts of people that can see what they'd like, but they don't take the time to create the specific actions that they need to take on a daily or weekly basis in order to close the gap.
Right. And you're familiar with the term leading indicators, right?
Yes.
Versus trailing indicators?
Yes.
And that's really what you're talking about. You know, are you, for example, if you want to lose 50 pounds, the scales are the worst metric that you can have, because once you step on the scales at the end of the week, it's over. I mean, that's like the scoreboard on a football game. But if you want the right metric, it's exactly what Daniel is saying, that you want to measure every day, did I do my 45-minute walk today? Did, you know, how many calories did I eat today? You start measuring those leading indicators, the things that lead behind, you know, that are before the score. They actually create the score. You count those behaviors and do them, you'll get the scale outcome that you want.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Hey, do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, let me. Can I mention one thing to do my little job here as well? Because I always forget this, and then I get all the emails. Now, that stuff you talked about, was it written anywhere? The book is coming out. If you guys can make a note of this, put a tickler up or something. It's like April 17th, and it's called Boundaries for Leaders. And it'll be on like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all that.
I cannot wait to read it. I actually want to see a galley, my friend. So
you will get one.
All right, I'll pick it up next week. There are questions coming in, and we got a little bit of a late start. For those of you who got to hear the behind the scenes of Daniel freaking out because he's using new technology for a webinar.
Well, actually, I think it was our office that was screwing it up too. So it's really our fault.
You know what's happening, man, is we're just getting a little older, and the new technology is not as easy as just picking up the phone and talking. But we did it. We're here. People are actually seeing slides. We're like so 1990s. It's amazing. Let's answer some questions. There's somebody on the line that wants to know, how do you get out of the mud on the 3 Ps?
Really, really good question. In the book, I actually have a structured program to do this that I like for teams to do, but I'm going to give you 4 steps, and if you will do these, you won't believe what will happen. Number 1, it's best to do it in a connected space. So you can do it on your own. I'd rather you do it with a buddy or with 3 or 4, you know, of your friends, and you sit down at a regular time, and number 1 is you connect, and you start to talk about this stuff and kind of where you're struggling, because what we know is the brain works best when it's fueled by relationship, positive relationship. So when you get support, then basically your brain chemistry begins to change. So that's the first step of getting out of the 3 Ps. Secondly, you want to begin to, and this is going to sound elementary, but trust me, you want to log them. You want to write them down, okay? So, for example, one guy I worked with, you know, again in the financial meltdown, he was thinking this way, and he said, you know, I just can't call my clients because I know they're going to be bugged, they're going to be mad. And I said, all right, what I want you to do is I want you to write down the 3 Ps as you're thinking about any event, before or after. Write them down. Okay, I'm a loser, I'm no good, you know, they're going to hate me, they all hate me, all this kind of stuff. Write that stuff down. Then I want you to make the call, and I want you to then write down what actually happened. And what he found was that 99% of them were really glad to hear from him, they needed help, they were lost, he had good conversations, and the reality was way different than the negative. So you want to log that, but also when something does happen after the event, if, say, you don't get a sale or the meeting doesn't go well or you don't do the presentation well, then log your thinking. And what you're going to see is, I'm a loser. You know, it's not just this one. They're all like that. It's not going to change. And begin to dispute that with the kind of normal thinking that people who perform well have. They'll think, okay, I could shift this or not, or that, you know, I could do the presentation better, or the person wasn't ready, or the, you know, the market's bad, or something, and move on and begin to dispute the pervasive thing. No, it's just one deal. It's not all my deals. It's one customer. I know the numbers. If I make 50 calls, I'll get one. You know, and so you get very objective about disputing this stuff. Then the third thing you do is, I want you to make 2 columns, and in the first column write down all of the crap that you can't control. The bad market, healthcare reform, got a competitor that moved in down the street, you know, the economy's bad. But write down all the stuff that's outside of your control and put it in a column. Then sit down, read that column, and really worry about that stuff. Like, drive yourself crazy, obsess about it. Just go nuts for about 5 minutes. And then hit the timer and say, okay, I'm done. Now move over to the second column. And the second column is the things you actually can control that affect outcomes. I can make cold calls. I can have a seminar. I can have lunches with my clients. I can look for new and search for new leads. All the things that you have 100% control of. Nobody can affect any of that. You can do it. And it's all those things like making those calls, rallying the team, doing the coaching inside of your company, walking around, stuff that you can control, and you begin to focus on those specific activities. And then the fourth thing is add structure to that. So begin to measure those, how many you're going to do. And for example, I talked to one guy one time who said every Sunday or Friday afternoon, before the next week, he said, I know I've got 9 discretionary bullets of time that I can fire. I've got 2 dinners, 3 lunches, and 4 breakfasts. Every Friday, I look at the business and say, who do I need to get to speak energy into this or tweak this or push that? He sends the emails out on Friday. He fills those blocks of time, and he spends those. And that's what I mean by a metric, that you're counting the behaviors that actually change things. If you do those 4 things, you'll never see the 3 Ps again.
I love that. You know, so much of the people on the call, and there's still quite a few, so we're going beyond the scheduled 30 minutes, and I'm assuming that you're all on because you're digging this. So we've got some more time. I do. I think Henry does. Let's keep going. What I love about how to get out of those 3 Ps. I love the step-by-step, Henry. It's perfect. And so much of it drives to the one-page simple business plan. You know, when you get down to what you can control, you write down the specific things you can do. You add structure to it. When you're going to do it, what time, how often. What you're doing is you are intentionally and proactively changing your future. And those steps make so much sense. Let's take one more question. Oh, go ahead.
You know, what you're doing with all that, Daniel, is you're basically working in the way that we're designed to make things work. I mean, it literally is, you know, that whole thing about when you've heard it 1,000 times, like people that do extraordinary things don't do extraordinary things. They do ordinary things extraordinarily. You know, Microsoft was built one line of code at a time, one phone call at a time, one meeting at a time. It's like we look at people that accomplish these huge things, and we think, how did they do that?
Right.
You know, well, they didn't do that. They did 80,000 little bitty things that other people can do that other people don't want to do.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so true. And so many times people will give up because what they see is so much bigger than what's necessary for them to begin today.
Right. That's exactly right.
We have somebody who would like to better understand what working memory means.
Yeah.
So explain that?
Well, let me give you a good example that we all experience. Let's say that you have a management team meeting, or you got your team meeting, or you've got whoever you're working with, and you talk about, okay, well, we need to, what we need to, our most important thing, is we got to open up that new region, or we got to go hit this new sector, or we're going to let's go land 3 new customers or whatever. And so you spend a day or a half day and you think about it, you got a plan, everybody's all juiced up over this, and then you say, okay, next, and you get to the next thing, and then you get involved in the business, and then other things happen, and there's this thing that you spend all this time and energy thinking about, and you get back together in your meeting 3 or 4 weeks later, and it's kind of like, so where are we on that? Well, I didn't really have time, and this, that, and the other. And so not only have we not moved the ball down the field because we got distracted, but now when we start talking about it again, we almost start over because the brain loses the continuity of thought that was going into it. For example, if you're gonna write a presentation, that you're going to make a big sales presentation or something, and you block out a couple of hours to write that, and you literally block it out, and I mean literally, you shut down Outlook. You turn the phone off. If you're not a neurosurgeon, why would you ever have, or an ER doctor, why would you ever have an emergency, right? So you literally lock yourself up, and you start to work on that. That means every thought that you have comes out of a working memory of the last 10 minutes of thought, and it's going to be at a higher, more developed level than if you, for example, you start on it, you get a phone call, you put it aside, now you're working on some unrelated deal, and then your assistant walks in, and then somebody else calls, and 45 minutes later you get back to it. You've lost your working memory, and your brain cannot work that way at its highest levels. One of the things that research has shown more than anything is that this thing called multitasking reduces, like a Harvard MBA, to a lizard in terms of IQ. Yeah. The brain literally cannot do it. Multitasking basically means you're putting down something to focus on something else, and you put that down to focus on something else. You can't really do 4 things at the same time.
So what you just did was, I can guarantee you, all of the Building Champions coaches are clapping right now, because when clients try to do their business vision in 9 or 10 different sittings in between meetings over a period of 3 weeks, instead of doing it by taking 1 day and truly focusing, or 2 days and truly focusing on unearthing that, right, and giving themselves the ability to truly focus, there's a reason for it. And there's a reason for you to spend these larger blocks of time focusing on your priorities, the projects at work that are truly most important. So just great stuff. Yeah, we don't want to be multitasking lizards for sure.
You would not believe the research on this, Daniel. I've seen some things that say when you are involved in something deeply creative and it takes all of your brain really to do it well, like writing a proposal or figuring out a strategic plan or something like that, and you stop to answer an email, what they say you actually lose, I've seen some research that's up to 20 minutes.
Crazy.
That's what you effectively lose.
I tell you what, man, that in itself has got to just help so many of us. We need to stay true to our on time, as we call it. At Building Champions, we say on time equals improvement, and that's the time to think, to execute, to reflect, to plan. And we want to see all of our clients have that as a regular and ongoing discipline through their days and their weeks.
It's just absolutely huge. It's why, I've sat in these war rooms with these leaders that lead these, $30, $40 billion enterprises, and there's so many of them, Daniel, that when they're in that meeting with their team, the last thing any of those people would do is pull out a BlackBerry because they're going to get shot.
Yeah.
If you're going to be here, you're going to be here.
Well, leaders, there was another great tip. bring your gun to your meetings and don't allow that. So,
hey, just start it at dinner and see how much, and see how much your spouse appreciates it.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's another one. We cannot have we can't allow that at the dinner table. But you and I could go on for a few hours. I'll see you next Tuesday. I am so looking forward to it. Thank you for adding value to Building Champions and to our clients and friends. You're awesome, man. I just enjoy learning from you.
And all the folks that are still on the call, Daniel knows, and I hope I'm going to tell you, I am not just blowing smoke here, because I've told him this 1,000 times before we ever knew I'd do a call with him, because I know his clients, and I know kind of the structure and the biochemistry behind the Building Champions platform, and it's just great, great, great stuff, which I'll do, Daniel. So
thanks.
Keep it up.
I shall. I'll see you next week, bud. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
A ton of value.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Thanks. All right, folks, more information. You've got it up on the screen. There's still a 150 plus of you on there. If you need more info, it's there. You want to learn from us and follow us on Facebook, on Twitter. It's all there. We are so grateful for you. Thank you very much. If we can do anything for you as you finish this awesome year out, please let us know. We'll talk to you next month. Bye-bye.